Hey guys, it's Dani. Today we'll be addressing a subject that one of you suggested, and this is naturally deciduous orchids, meaning orchids that lose their leaves as part of their normal growth pattern. As you might know, most orchids we grow and, well, the most popular orchids in flower shops or garden centers are not deciduous. They continuously grow leaves, and typically when we have a lot of leaves yellowing and falling, there's something wrong with the orchid. It's not the case with this orchid, for example. So I know it might look a little scary, but let's address a few of the orchids which are known to be deciduous. Some of the most popular deciduous orchids are dendrobiums. The ones we see here are two species. This is the Dendrobium anosmum and this is the Parishi. I will share with you a video in which you can see them in bloom. They're some of my favorite because the flower display is absolutely gorgeous. But it only happens once a year. And there's another drawback. These orchids lose all of their leaves once per year. All of the new leaves they create within the summer or warmer months, they lose in the autumn or winter and prepare to bloom. So in time, you can expect with these orchids absolutely bare canes. And if they bloomed 1 year and all of the eyes or nodes are spent, then they will not bloom again. So these orchids will always have bare canes, and you can see on the Parishi we do have some older canes here which should remain on the plant at least for a few years. In time these canes will shrivel more and more and more, and let's say maybe after 4 years or so, when you have other older canes which look a little better, you can actually remove the oldest canes just to make the orchid look a little bit more pretty, because at some point you'll have half green canes, half dried canes. But generally, it's never a good idea to cut the previous year's canes or the previous 2 years' canes, because even if they don't bloom and they don't look nice, they store water, they store energy, they help the new growth and other growths in general. Now, in the orchid hobby, we actually have two terms for orchids which lose leaves. First is deciduous, which I'm sure many of you know, because we refer to trees as being deciduous in colder parts of the world. But we also have semi-deciduous plants, which I will get to. The Dendrobium anosmum, Parishi, Aphyllum, and I'm sure there are many other species and even hybrids between them. We call them proper deciduous orchids because every year all of these leaves will fall. The next year a new cane will start to grow, which will be green, but the older canes pretty much will be absolutely bare and leafless. We also have what we call semi-deciduous orchids, meaning orchids which will eventually lose all of their leaves, but it doesn't happen on an annual basis. And the best example and the most popular orchid that does this is the Dendrobium nobile. Links down below to more information about this orchid if you're a beginner and you don't know it very well. This orchid doesn't necessarily lose all of its leaves every year before flowering. Furthermore, massive leaf loss never ever happens on brand new growths. When they bloom, they are still green, they still have leaves, but it happens on the older canes. So this is a 2-year-old cane. You can see that the leaves are falling, but I still have a few green leaves. On the other side, I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old cane, which is this one, which you can see already is leafless. It doesn't mean the orchid is sick. It's normal for it to lose leaves, but it doesn't lose leaves on new growths. The period in which I observed they lose the most leaves is in the autumn when temperatures cool down. But the leaf loss, as I was saying, only happens in older canes. Hence why we call these semi-deciduous. Not entirely sure if it's 100% grammatically correct, but that's what we mean at least. The leaves will fall eventually, it just doesn't happen once per year for the new growths. And of course, just like with the anosmum and Parishi, leaf loss is usually followed by buds and flowers. So it is a moment to celebrate. Even if it could look scary, it's absolutely normal for this orchid to lose leaves. Typically, with deciduous and semi-deciduous orchids, the culture will need to take into account this period in which they will practically not grow actively. They will produce no leaves, no canes, nothing of the sorts, barely any roots, and the parts which are affected by this are watering and fertilizing. In winter, typically, you will notice the canes are done growing. You can see there is no more leaf starting to grow from the top of the cane, but leaves are gonna start to yellow and fall from the base. At this point, fertilizer is absolutely not needed for anything because the orchid already has stored nutrients and it really doesn't consume as many nutrients even if it's producing buds. When it comes to watering, well, this really is relative, and honestly, I cannot tell you a formula which you should follow. All I can say is look at your orchid. If you see the new cane starting to shrivel, definitely your orchid needs a little bit of watering. You don't need to soak it or anything like maybe you did in the summer, but just run water through the pot. Keep in mind, the older canes will naturally be more shriveled, so they are not a clear indication. Just look at the new canes. Side note, if you see the older canes, particularly the ones from last year, shrivel and become like a leaf, then yes, you can take that as a sign as well. But if you see a few wrinkles, that's absolutely normal. Anyway, try to limit watering as much as possible because the orchid really isn't consuming as much. And if you water it, the medium might stay wet for quite a long time because the orchid is simply not absorbing water. And other than that, these orchids are pretty easy to grow. Keep in mind the drop in temperature as well, but you'll have more information about that in the description. For other orchids, culture will be a little bit different during this transition period. So what we see here is a catasetum type orchid. This is a Fritclarchiera after dark. It is a complex hybrid. And these orchids are again very well known for being deciduous, totally deciduous, meaning every year they will lose the leaves they grew during summertime. And just like the dendrobiums, this usually happens in autumn or winter. Unlike the dendrobiums we just saw, these orchids don't need a drop in temperature. They're pretty warm growers. But when it comes to fertilizer and withholding water, things are pretty similar, even a little bit more drastic. So fertilizer, out of the question. The orchid is just not growing anything anymore. It doesn't need nutrients. Water, well, it will depend. Most catasetums don't actually need 1 drop of water during their dormancy, time in which they won't even need light, because they're not preparing buds, they're not actually preparing anything, they are regrouping, if you will, and will put out new growth typically in the spring. Since they don't need light, they don't need water or fertilizer, you can absolutely keep them bare-rooted. Some growers actually remove all of their roots once a year from these catasetums, because these are true dormancy plants, unlike the dendrobiums we saw, which are not true dormant plants. Because catasetums can be complex as well, and because in their parentage we can have species which have long dormancies combined with species which have very short dormancies, not all hybrids will behave the same way. Some of them will have a 2-week dormancy, let's put it like that, while others can stay 3 months or 4 months in dormancy. But as far as I know, all of these individuals, hybrids and species, will lose their leaves, but the duration of this dormancy can vary greatly. So up until now, we've seen orchids that look kind of familiar. They have pseudobulbs, dendrobiums, we find them in the flower shops, catasetums, they don't look like they're not orchids. But take a look at this. What do you suppose this is? It is a terrestrial orchid, which is deciduous. And you can see currently I have no more leaves on mine, but I do have a flower spike, which is starting to open. This is a Spathoglottis affinis. There are quite a few varieties, or species actually, should I say, that might not be fully deciduous, or if they are, they might bloom while they still have leaves, but this particular one can bloom while all of the leaves are gone. And if all the leaves and all the orchid is gone, what creates the flower spike? Well, it's a bulb, not a pseudo-bulb, a true bulb. Just like the pseudo-bulb, the bulb actually stores energy, nutrients, and moisture that it absorbs from the leaves, pretty much like a tulip. And even though the leaves fall once a year, a new growth will be created once a year, obviously. Now, personally, I don't have enough experience with this orchid to tell you more about its culture. This is the first year that I'm growing it, and I'm happy to have it in bloom, but I'm not entirely sure about its culture. At the moment, I am withholding watering, fertilizer, absolutely no fertilizer, no need. But I do plan to unpot the bulbs, see how they look like, how they performed, if they multiplied, and I'll be sure to make a video then. But there we have it, there are orchids which do produce subterranean bulbs that lose their leaves once a year. And this is not the only one. There are Habenarias which do the very same thing. I used to have one. I lost it sadly when I moved here, but it's on my wish list, don't worry. Habenarias are known to be deciduous and have corms inside the soil as well. Two more deciduous orchids that I have in my collection are the Bifrenaria, this is the Tyriantina, and also the Lycase. I have the Aromatica. Oh, I almost forgot the names of these orchids. Lycases and their relatives are known to be deciduous, and they do lose their leaves once a year. Bifrenarias, I do believe most of them are deciduous. This is the only one that I have. I don't have a lot of experience with these guys. This one was a tiny one when I received it. But both of them are pretty popular in the hobby. You cannot purchase them at flower shops, obviously, but at orchid nurseries. And as far as I know, they're all deciduous. If you guys know more about the Bifrenarias, do let us know a comment down below if all of them are deciduous. And what has been your experience with them? Are they semi-deciduous? Do you still need to water them from time to time? Let us know your experience. Generally speaking, there are more sympodial orchids that are deciduous rather than monopodials. It makes sense. If they lose their leaves, they still have the pseudobulbs, but what if a Phalaenopsis will lose all of its leaves? What will we still have left? And yet, there is a Phalaenopsis out there which is deciduous. I don't remember the name. I'll put it on the screen so you can research it more. I do not own that Phalaenopsis, but I know of its existence because I'm super curious to find out how a monopodial can be deciduous. Now, the deciduous aspect of these orchids is, of course, regeneration. In our collections, we do try to keep foliage in tip-top condition. If we see a little spot, we kind of freak out. And considering that in orchid shows, if you have blemishes on the leaves, I don't know, maybe you're disqualified, but definitely you have points off. Well, nature doesn't really work like that. It doesn't really care about aesthetics. And chances are that the older the leaf is, the more damaged it is by sunburn, by insects, by winds. Who knows? In nature, many things can happen. So all orchids have this regeneration process. Even the non-deciduous orchids lose their leaves from time to time, they just don't lose all of their leaves. But with deciduous orchids, they can care less about what happens to their leaves because in 1 year's time, they're all gone. And fresh new leaves, which are healthy and very functional, take their place. Not all orchids can afford to have a dormancy, obviously. This is just an adaptation to their environment. But as far as cultivation is concerned, I really like deciduous orchids because if I get some leaf tip dieback, some sunburn, some unpleasing blemish, well, I know that next year I'm not gonna have to look at it. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this useful. You know the drill. Like or dislike this video below. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you wish to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!